יהודי לקראת קלה, פני שבת נקבלה.
How's it going, sir?
Assalamu alaikum. Shalom.
Wa alaikum assalam. How's it going?
I'm good. I hope you are. That was a very interesting conversation you had.
It was, yes. You see how he said that the Holy Spirit, told Paul to distort the text there? How'd you feel about that?
I have a lot of problems with Paul already from a Jewish perspective, as you know. So I'm not surprised hearing these things that Christians say.
Yeah, absolutely, man. What do you want to talk about today, man? What's up?
So before you said that Muhammad, I'm very interested in this, that Muhammad is in the Tanakh. And in a lot of cases, you use the same verses that Christians say speak of the coming of Jesus in the Tanakh. For example, you said in Deuteronomy 18:18, the prophet like Moses is Muhammad.
Yeah, of course. Because we could see that historically there has been a prophet expected from these verses. So it wouldn't be a surprise to say that the early Christian movement associated the one who's coming with Jesus, right? But when Deuteronomy 18:18 is read in its context, especially in its earlier, more original reading, and I'll break down what I mean by that. Okay. So in the Samaritan text, I know maybe you don't like the Samaritan Torah, but in the Samaritan Torah, we see a slightly different reading, and in how it's quoted in Acts in the Greek, it's also a different reading as well. So in the Masoretic text, Deuteronomy 18:18 says, "Navi achim laka meqerevka me'achika." Okay, which means in Hebrew, a prophet I will raise for you from your midst, from your brothers, Israel. So that reading makes it that the prophet to come is from Israel. Okay. However, in the Samaritan text, we read, Navi achim laka meqerev achika. A prophet I raise from you from the midst of your brethren. Not from your midst, your brethren. From the midst of your brethren. And that's going to make a lot of sense in a second. Okay. Now, the brethren of Israel, okay, are going to be the Edomites and the Ishmaelites. Okay. Both of which are Arabs. The Edomites are Arabs and the Ishmaelites are Arabs. Okay. The other issue why this can't be an Israelite is because no prophet like Moses can come in Israel. Okay. And that's supported by Torah commentaries, and that's made from Deuteronomy 34 verse 10, where it says, there has never arose a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom God knew face to face.
Face to face.
In the Samaritan reading, it says, there shall arise no more a prophet in Israel like Moses, whom God knew face to face. And actually, these readings complement each other, because if you read some commentaries on the Torah, on that verse, it'll say that because the Torah is eternal, then this verse stands true in every age. That in every age, there is no prophet in Israel like Moses. And it wouldn't make much sense, because this is the end of Deuteronomy. Moses just died. It doesn't make sense for us to say, since that time, there's never arose an Israel prophet. Well, it's been not even it's been such a short time. So what do you mean since that time, no prophet in Israel? So there can't be another prophet in Israel like Moses. The prophet to come has to be like Moses. What does that mean? Well, what distinguishes Moses? Because we could all draw parallels. Jesus went to Egypt and came back, and Moses was in Egypt and he came out. Oh, they're similar. But what distinguishes Moses from all the other prophets? What does Moses have that no other prophet has? There's two things. That he spoke to God face to face, meaning that he spoke to God like his friend. They spoke to each other directly, like a friend speaks to his friend. That's what Rashi says, and I believe other Jewish commentators. The other thing that distinguishes Moses is the Torah, is the law. Okay, every prophet was under, well, after Moses that is, was under Moses' law. So to be like Moses is to speak to God face to face and to bring a new law. Okay, so this prophet is going to be like Moses. What distinguishes him is going to have a new law. Okay, he's going to be an Arab. Okay, he's going to be either an Ishmaelite or an Edomite. Okay, and he's going to speak to God face to face. Okay, actually, some rabbis have said, and I can find this, I think it's the Talmud, in order for the Torah to be abrogated, the prophet must be greater than Moses. In which the prophet Muhammad abrogated the Torah and was greater than Moses. He was like Moses and greater than Moses. Okay, so we would say that Deuteronomy 18, in its context, that, remember, this can't be, and I'll tell you why it can't be Jesus as well. The context is this: the Israelites are asking God, or saying that they don't want to hear the voice of God no more. Because last time they heard their voice, they were terrified. And they're speaking in the collective singular. Lest I hear the voice of God. Let me not hear the voice of God anymore. So Israel's being personified as one person. Okay? Now, that means the prophet, when he comes, the Israelites will not hear the voice of God. God will speak to the people through this prophet. Why is this important? Because if we go to Peter, they heard the voice of God. Peter says, when there was a voice from heaven saying, one second, the camera always gotta die, man, right in the middle. Let's put this in quick. Here we go. Okay. They said, when the voice came from heaven saying, "This is my son with whom I'm well pleased." Peter says, well, the author of Peter says, we ourselves heard this voice. So Jesus, not only is he disqualified because he's an Israelite, or so to speak, okay, even though he didn't have a dad, okay, he didn't bring a new law, he was under Moses, so he couldn't possibly have been like Moses, okay, he was apparently a man god, it's nonsense. Okay, and he was not an Arab, and they heard the voice of God. Okay, so Jesus is disqualified. Okay, and now we connect this prophet, this expectation of an Arab prophet who comes, brings a new law. He is like Moses. God speaks through him. Okay, as if it's God speaking to us directly, and we shall obey everything he says. So we have this expectation. We also connect this with an expectation of somebody coming from Arabia. We can go to Deuteronomy 33 and we can go to Habakkuk, the Navi Habakkuk, okay? What does he say? He says, Habakkuk chapter 3, he says, Ilo avo meteiman ve'kodosh mehar faran. He says, God will come from Teman and the Holy One from Mount Paran. And then the chapter goes to explain how when God comes to Paran, he will conquer nations militarily and spread worldwide recognition of the God of Israel. Okay? So again, we see this theme of somebody coming associated to Paran. Paran, we know in the Torah, is associated with the Ishmaelites. Okay? It's associated with the Ishmaelites. Okay? So somebody's going to come from Arabia, from Paran. Okay, he's gonna militarily conquer the nations, and he will spread worldwide recognition of the true God. Okay, this is echoed and paralleled in Deuteronomy 33. It says, God came from Sinai, okay, and rose forth from Mount Seir, or shone forth, or whatever, and then is shown forth from Mount Paran. So we have three stages of the sun. Rising from Sinai, okay. Now it's the sun is still rising. It's not quite there yet. This is Seir. Seir is connected to Palestine, and then the final stage, when the sun is completely up, this is imagery, is when God comes from Paran with 10,000 holy ones and a law in his right hand. So how do we make sense of this text? God came from Sinai. Okay, that's Moses, perhaps. Seir, that's connected with the Edomites, connected to Palestine. It's a little bit ambiguous. And then God will come forth to Arabia with 10,000 holy ones and a law in his right hand. Well, when did that take place? When did that take? We have to ask ourselves that. Okay? And again, connected to Genesis 17, went over last time, that Ishmael will be a great nation. According to the Torah, a great nation is a nation that obeys God and has a body of laws. So when did Ishmael become a nation that obeys God and lives before God? Well, we know it's none other than when Islam came. Okay? Daniel chapter 2, where there's the 4 kingdoms. Okay? There's Babylon, Medo-Persia, that's prophesied by Jeremiah, by Ezekiel, that Medo-Persia will come, that Darius, the Mede, and Cyrus, the Persian, will come together and destroy the Babylonians, and Israel will be freed. Okay? After the Medes and the Persians came, Alexander the Great, Macedonian Greece. Okay? That's the third world empire.
I want to just stay focused, because I know you said a lot here, and a lot of this is interesting. So are you aware of the Jewish perspective on Deuteronomy 18:18?
Yeah, so I know that the majority interpretation is that this doesn't refer to a singular prophet. This refers to basically every prophet that God sent after. So that's
Rashi's point of view.
Yeah.
The traditional understanding in Judaism is that Rashi's point of view is, of course, generally correct, but more specifically, Deuteronomy 18:18 is talking about the Hebrew secession after Moses, because, of course, as you know, as you just mentioned, that this is coming about toward the end of Moses' life. And the question that's being asked is, who then will the Jews follow in leadership? And God saying to the Jews says, I will rise up amongst your brothers a prophet like Moses. And we're told specifically who that prophet is, Yehoshua. And Yehoshua 1:14.
Joshua was already a prophet.
And in Joshua 1:14, what are we told? And you can bring this up if you want to on the screen, but we're told specifically that God would be with Yehoshua just as he was with Moses, and that all of the people of Israel will listen to Yehoshua as they listened to Moses. And, of course, Joshua is the leader of the Israelis after the death of Moses. And this is very different than what happens in Islam. When Muhammad, of course, dies, there is no proper line of succession, and that causes a break between the Sunni and the Shiite Muslims. That doesn't happen in Judaism because we have a proper line of succession that was given to us by God.
You also have a Samaritan split. So the
Samaritans are not a split from Judaism. Of course, you know that. The Samaritans were an outside group. And it was by God's lions that were poured upon them that they converted to Judaism.
Oh, that's according to you, but according to them, but let's hear me out. Okay, this has nothing to do with succession. I'll tell you why. Joshua, number one, was already a prophet, so it doesn't make sense for God. I will raise up for you a prophet
like Moses.
Joshua was already a prophet.
A prophet like Moses is the qualification. Of course, Miriam was a prophet as well.
Joshua was not like Moses.
And so, well, he was like Moses in the specific regards. The qualifications are there in Yehoshua 1:14 through 18. It's there very clearly what the qualifications are. Well, I mean, you can pull it up on the screen. I would ask all.
We could go over it, but just remember, I made several arguments. Okay.
Well, I'm only taking on. I know you did a lot. I
understand, but I'll tell you why it can't be Joshua. Joshua was already a prophet. Okay.
That doesn't make any sense.
So they already. What do you mean that doesn't make sense?
Just because he is a prophet doesn't mean he can't be.
Yeah. So if he's a prophet, then God shouldn't say, "I will raise up for you a prophet," because he's already been raised as a prophet.
He's been raised up as a prophet, but he's not been raised as a prophet in leadership like Moses.
Just wait, okay? That's point number one. Point number two, okay? What distinguishes Moses from all the prophets? Because when God says the prophet will be like Moses, there must be something that distinguishes Moses. And Joshua didn't have anything that distinguishes him, just like Moses. I want to make sure that you understand this. The prophet cannot be an Israelite, because no prophet like Moses can come from Israel. But Joshua was an Israelite. I want you to address that.
Okay, so I disagree with you on the qualification of what it means to be like Moses. Of course, there are no additional lawgivers in the entirety of the Tanakh or the Jewish tradition. So that's not the qualification. The specific qualification for being like Moses is directly stated word for word in Joshua. Look at Joshua's first chapter, verses 14 through 18. It tells you exactly why Joshua is like Moses, that the people will listen to him as they listen to Moses.
They listen to all the prophets like that.
So hold on. And that God will be with Joshua as he was with Moses.
That was the case with all the prophets.
Well, that's what Rashi says. But specifically in Deuteronomy 18, this is a question of succession. You disagree. This is a question of succession.
So he's not like Moses then.
And the immediate leader who is risen up is Joshua to lead the Jews.
So then you would then have to agree that Jesus is like Moses.
I'm sorry?
Is Jesus like Moses?
Oh gosh, no.
Well, why not? He was obeyed just like Moses.
No, it was not.
And God was with him just like Moses.
And he was not obeyed like Moses, and you know that. I mean, this is part of the Christian argument, that he was rejected by the Jews, that he was tried by the Sanhedrin, by the Jewish leaders, by the high priest, and that he was eventually...
Yeah, of course he wouldn't be obeyed by the...
That didn't happen to Moses at all.
Of course he wouldn't, but he wouldn't be obeyed by those who didn't believe in him, obviously.
But the Jews believed in Moses' leadership that was ordained to him by God, just as Yehoshua's leadership was ordained.
That's fine. That's fine. So in the people that believed in him, they obeyed him, just like the people that believed in Jesus obeyed him. So I'm trying. Just let me finish. Let me finish, please. So the point is this: when you say that being like Moses is flexible, then every prophet in the Torah is like Moses. Every prophet in the Tanakh is like Moses. But this prophet would be specifically, distinguishably like Moses. What separates Moses is the law that he brought and that he spoke to God face to face. Okay? And remember, you didn't still address the argument. He cannot be an Israelite.
Well, that's your opinion. I don't accept that. I don't accept that qualification.
And there would be a prophet in Moses like him.
You want me to accept the Samaritan text when I heard?
I didn't say accept the Samaritan.
No. This came from the Samaritan text. This view that it isn't amongst the brothers of Israel that the prophets will be raised.
No. Deuteronomy 34:10 is both in the Samaritan and in the Masoretic. They both say no prophet can come in Israel like Moses.
So again, the difference is the qualification of what it means to be like Moses. And you're not picking the qualifications that are specified directly in the book of Joshua. And I don't know why, because I guess it goes to your argument that being like Moses means specifically how God communicated to Moses. But that's not what we're told. We're told that being like Moses is taking on the same authoritative leadership that was granted to God by him. And that's exactly what happens in his succession.
Then every prophet is like Moses. Why are you not understanding what I'm saying?
Well, again, you brought up Rashi. I also accept Rashi's point of view that generally speaking, of course, anybody who is a prophet in a sense is going to be like Moses. Christians and Muslims like to say, hold on, just let me finish here. Christians and Muslims like to say that Jesus and Muhammad is typological of the Hebrew Bible. Well, here, I
didn't say typo. When did I say typo? When did I say typological?
Well, you haven't tonight. You said it before, but if
I didn't say it at all. I've never said that.
Well, you were just saying in terms of Muhammad being the one to free the Jews, Muhammad being the one.
That's not a typology. I'm not speaking about a typology. I'm talking about a literal fulfillment.
Well, of course, Muhammad didn't do any of those things.
Of course he did. You didn't have an answer.
I know we're getting away. I know we're getting away from Deuteronomy 18:18.
Yeah. So just stick there. Okay. This is the argument. Okay. The argument is this: do you agree that God speaks to Israel as if they are one person?
That happens commonly throughout the Bible. Absolutely.
No. Okay. So here in this context, God is speaking to Israel as one person. Correct?
In which passage are you referring to? In Deuteronomy 18:18?
18:15 up until 16 and 18.
Well, I mean, it depends on the specific passage. He goes in and out from speaking directly to Moses.
In 18:16, he speaks to Israel as one person.
In Deuteronomy 18:16, yes.
Okay, good. So he says to the one person Israel that the prophet will be from the one person Israel's brethren, correct?
Yeah, that's what I'm arguing.
Okay.
The brethren of
can the brethren of Israel include Israel?
Well, again, you're reading that a little bit differently, but it's the brethren within Israel. That would be. Well, hold on. That would be.
Remember, Israel is spoken to as one person. One person. There's one person, Israel. The brothers of the one person cannot be the one person, Israel himself. For example, if I tell you, Tony, I'm going to give this water bottle to the brothers of Tony. Is Tony getting the water bottle?
Well, amongst your brethren. So that would be, so in that sense, I mean, all of the Jews are a people, and they are brothers amongst one another.
I want you to respond to this, though. If I say I'm going to give the water to the brothers of the one person, Tony, is Tony getting the water bottle?
It would be because my brothers would be ethnically the same.
Tony,
people.
but Tony's not getting the water bottle, right?
Me specifically, now I'm an individual. You can't think of me as a group.
Israel is being spoken to as a singular individual.
It's being personified
as a single person, right?
But as you know, in Isaiah 49, for example, when God calls Israel up, he says it's too light of a burden for you to bring back the other tribes of Jacob. I should make you like one of the nations. So it's Israel to bring back Israel. So this happens throughout the biblical prose all the time. Now, your analogy is faulty because, of course, I'm only a single person.
I'll tell you. When God refers to a group and he says the brothers of that group cannot be the group itself. For example, I'll tell you an example. In the beginning of Deuteronomy, God is speaking to which group? The Levites, right?
Okay.
He says to the Levites, your brethren. When he says your brethren, does that include the Levites or is it just the brothers of the Levites?
It depends on the specific passage. I mean, you have to take these things in context.
In Deuteronomy, when God picks out the Levites and speaks about the brethren of the Levites, he's not speaking about the Levites themselves, but the brother nations of Levi. Similarly, when God picks out Israel as one person and says the brother nations of Israel, the one person, the brothers of Israel are not Israel themselves. That's number one. Number two, the earlier reading, that is from I'm not talking about what you think is canonical or not now. I'm talking about our earliest reading, because the Masoretic text is quite late. Okay, it's quite late historically, that is.
Well, the Masoretic text, okay, I'll let you finish your point.
Yeah, the earlier reading reads, Navi akim laka mekerev achika. not mecherevka menachika. Okay, so it says, a prophet I raise from you, from your brethren, not from your midst, from your brethren.
I'm going to continue to reject. First of all, I reject that analysis of the Masoretic text. Of course, you know that the Masoretic text, this tradition, has been immaculately preserved. Even secular historians, when accounting and cross-sectioning the Masoretic text with the Dead Sea Scrolls, they find that the Masoretes had remarkably preserved the Hebrew text through their scribal tradition. So I absolutely reject that.
You don't even believe that.
Why?
You don't even believe that. You want to know why? You want to know why? I'll tell you why, Tony. I'll tell you why, Tony.
Better read or translation of the text is
no worries, Tony. Is
very few scholars would actually even acknowledge that point.
Are the Dead Sea Scrolls authoritative?
I'm sorry?
Are the Dead Sea Scrolls authoritative?
Well, of course, you know the Dead Sea Scrolls hold.
Oh,
let me finish.
Okay, so they're not preserved.
The Dead Sea hold on. The Dead Sea Scrolls is a reference to an entire set of different Hebrew and Greek scrolls that date all the way back to the 4th century BCE. So the idea that all of the Dead Sea Scrolls would be authoritative is completely nonsense. But but those are the Dead Sea Scrolls that correspond with the Hebrew Bible, of course, are authoritative.
Okay.
We have in the hold on, let me finish this point. We have in the Dead Sea Scrolls the entire corpus of the book of Isaiah, and it is identical to what you find not in the Greek Septuagint, but you find in the text.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
And of course,
you just lied.
Are there some differences in the vows? Are there some differences in the vows?
No, you just lied. I'm going to give you an example. Guys, he said Isaiah is identical in the Dead Sea Scroll to Masoretic. Watch this.
Well, there are. Well, hold on, because we want to be nuanced.
Now you're backtracking.
Well, I did say there are minor differences, but in terms of preserving the scriptural process, in terms of preserving the composition of the text, the Masoretic tradition has done an absolutely remarkable job doing this. And you would be one of the few, you're not a biblical scholar. There are many biblical scholars that support that what we see in Isaiah, the 66 book corpus that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1949, is identical virtually.
So which one is preserved? So which one is preserved? Is it the Dead Sea Scrolls or is it the Masoretic text?
Well, the Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, this is ridiculous. I don't know if you're a student of history or not. Of course, our earliest Masoretic texts come from the 9th and the 10th century. The Dead Sea Scrolls confirmed, though, that the Masoretic tradition has been preserved because we find that the composition of the text are nearly congruent.
Yeah, that's
a ridiculous argument.
Sir, you're not understanding. Okay, my point isn't the Masoretic text is not preserved. My point is that the Masoretic text, the Masoretic community adds an expansion on Deuteronomy 18. Because all of our readings before that say otherwise. So clearly
our readings, this is completely.
Let me finish. Why is it that the readings before the Masoretic reading all differ with the Masoretic reading, but agree with each other?
So the answer to that question is pretty obvious, and you might as well just convert to Christianity. I've never heard anything like this before, except from the lips of Christians. But of course, before the Masoretic text, before we found the Dead Sea Scrolls, what we had was the Greek Septuagints of the Hebrew Bible. And of course, as you know, that there is a proliferation of many different families.
You also had the Samaritan text.
Again, the Samaritan text, and I don't know why you keep on mentioning the Samaritan text. The Samaritan text is not an authentically Jewish. Well, it's not. It's not an authentic.
Yeah, of course you would say that. Of course you would say that. It's still a recension of the Torah, whether you like it or not.
Well,
you don't just get to dismiss it because they're Samaritans.
Well, it's a recension
of the Torah.
Samaritan. I'm dismissing it because The primary language of the Jewish people, of course, is Arabic and Hebrew, and it is the Jewish people who preserve the scribal tradition of the biblical text. And again, I gave the argument. I didn't say that the Masoretic tradition was preserved. What I said was that we can tell that the Masoretic tradition has preserved the textual composition of the text because it aligns with texts that we find that are written literally 1,000 years before.
Sir, I didn't say that it's a completely fabricated Torah or Tanakh. I said there is a clear expansion of the Deuteronomy 18. There is, because our earlier reading doesn't say mekerevcha. The earlier readings all agree that it's mekerev achika, from the midst of your brethren, not from your midst.
This is such nonsense. Just like any Christian can argue that the earlier readings of Isaiah 7:14 are Betula instead of Chama, but that doesn't, just because they're earlier readings doesn't make them correct. Guess what? Hold on, because this is complete nonsense. If you want to go to church on Sunday, you can. But this idea that you're going to attack the Masoretic tradition, that you're going to attack
you're just upset that I'm giving an earlier reading.
You're not being upset, but this idea to say that somehow that the Greek Septuagint or that the Samaritans know better about the Hebrew Bible than the Jews.
That's a theological, sir. That's a theological point. Of course, you think that. My point here. Can you stop cutting me off? I'm speaking. What you mentioned about Isaiah 7:14 saying Batula, right, in the Greek instead of saying Alma, okay. We could give a historical argument as to why Christians who are responsible for transmitting the Septuagint, all of our recensions of the Septuagint, which there are three main recensions. There's the recension of Origen. There's the recension of the Alexandrian recension. There's the one of Hesychius, and then there's a third one I forgot. Okay, all of which are transmitted by Christians. And of course, Christians, they have an agenda because Matthew quotes it that way. And so we can make an argument as to why they didn't transmit this faithfully. You can't give me an argument for why all of these earlier recensions of the Torah read differently when it comes to this Masoretic text.
This is nonsense. What do you mean all of these earlier renderings of the Torah? I mean, you're talking about the Greek Septuagint. You're talking about LXX. So I don't know what you mean by all of it. You're only talking about.
Yeah. Why would the LXX read that way? So why does the Septuagint read that way?
Are you going to let me speak here? Because we can't do this.
Yeah. Why does the Samaritan and the Septuagint read that way? Why?
First of all, this is complete nonsense. You don't even accept the canon, the Samaritan canon, the biblical canon.
I don't need to. I'm appealing to an earlier text.
Hold on. You don't accept the biblical canon. Well, I don't know what canon you accept because you don't accept the Hebrew Bible. You have this doctrine of corruption that's completely nonsensical.
It's in Jeremiah 9:9.
So, Samaritans, and this is for the Christian, Jewish, and Muslim audience out there. The Samaritans don't even accept the totality of the Jewish scriptures of the Tanakh.
What the heck does that have to do with?
I think people should understand.
Tony, stop. I'm gonna have to mute you, man. See, stop. The Samaritans not accepting the prophets and the rest of the books of the Tanakh has nothing to do with my argument. My argument is, can you give an explanation, a plausible explanation, for why our earliest recensions read Navi Achim Laka Mekerev Achika instead of Navi Achim Laka Mekerev Ka Meachika? You need to give me an explanation for why the earlier readings read this way, the historical witnesses read that way, and the later Masoretic text that came after Islam, okay, after Islam had already come, after the Muslims started appealing to Deuteronomy 18, started expanding Deuteronomy 18, sir. You want to give me why there is? Can you give me an explanation for that? You can.
This is complete nonsense again, because again, your reading, first of all, that's your interpretation of what the text means, even in the Samaritan text. But if your view was correct, even in the Greek Septuagint, then how is it that Christians would come to identify Jesus as the prophet like Moses, if in fact the reading that you're supplying disqualified Jesus because he's a direct ethnic brethren of the Jews? I mean, this is complete nonsense. Even
I got you. You want an answer?
Hold on. Even the own argument, the sources that you're bringing forth, the people who understood those sources had a completely different interpretation than the one that you're granting right now. So why should I buy your interpretation over their interpretations when they are primarily sourcing the text themselves?
Okay, let's see about that. Now, both of us can agree that the Christians corrupted the meaning of the text. Yes?
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
So then I don't need to give you an explanation as to why they appealed to the text and they appealed to a corrupted understanding, because both of us agree that they corrupted the meaning of the text. Wait, let me finish. Both of us agree that the Christians corrupted the meaning of the text and pushed their dead man God Messiah in there. Okay? So we could both agree. Now, with this reading, that the prophet will be from the midst of the brethren, not from the midst of Israel. Would you have to agree that these readings support that the prophet would be an Arab prophet?
No, I don't think that I don't think your reading of that mutually excludes the idea that it could come amongst the brothers of Israel. I don't think that this is.
How can the prophet be from the midst of the brother nations of Israel, yet be from Israel?
Well, first of all, at this time, we know that Israel is divided into tribes, and Israel itself is representative there. And this just common speak and prose throughout the Hebrew Bible, that God says that he will raise up people among them. Even the Messiah himself is going to be raised up amongst the brothers.
You're just not responding. So I guess we'll move on.
I mean, yeah, I guess we're going to.
Kadesh,